Welcome, everyone. My name is Anderson. I'm the coordinator for Read SC, the South Carolina Center for the Book. Thank you all for joining us. Before we begin, I want to make sure that all attendees know that we do have closed captions available. At the bottom of your screen, you will find a CC icon for closed captions if you would like a live transcript. The format of tonight's talk will be a brief introduction, then our speaker for this evening, Sylvie Feghali Smith, talking about her book, A Glimpse into My Life. After the talk, we should have time for a few questions. And there is a chat icon at the bottom of your screen. If you click on that button, the chat box will pop up on the right side of your screen for you to type in any questions that you have. Please feel free to enter questions at any point during tonight's talk. Now, a little bit about our speaker. Sylvie Feghali Smith immigrated with her family to the United States in 1983, settling in Colombia, South Carolina. While here, she learned English and earned her bachelor's and master's degree from the University of South Carolina. She has visited all of South Carolina's 47 state parks and has documented those experiences on her blog, sylviesadventures.com, where you can find authentic Lebanese and Southern recipes, thoughtful musings, and her photo gallery. I'm sure she would love for you to visit and discover something new, but now I would like to go ahead and give her the stage. Please welcome Sylvie Feghali Smith.
Thank you, Anderson, for your introduction. And thank you to the South Carolina Center for the Book for making this, for honoring South Carolina authors. This helps us greatly in advertising our books. I am delighted to introduce my book tonight on this medium, and I appreciate everyone who tuned in. I hope you find this hour educational, maybe a bit entertaining. And I'll get started. A Glimpse into My Life, here it is my first book. And this is my first talk to a US audience. I had one talk with a Toastmasters club from Lebanon, which I enjoyed greatly. Let me start by saying that I did not set out to be an author. My writing journey started in 2004 when a Toastmasters club was chartered at my work. I thought joining might improve my public speaking as well as my English, given that it's my third language. So I decided to join. Joining Toastmaster turned out to be one of the best decisions I have made. I have a great respect for this organization and highly recommend it. They didn't pay me to say that. Maybe they should. So as part of Toastmasters, I wrote and presented over 20 speeches in my club, and I reached the advanced communicator bronze level. The speeches were very well received, and after the first year, they voted me as Speaker of the Year, and that was quite an honor. But everybody who heard my speeches, club members, friends and family, or read them, suggested that I might want to publish them as short stories. Well, fast forward to 2019, when the opportunity presented itself for me to do just that. And thanks to my wonderful publisher, Spring Cedars, who was very supportive, the book was born. I decided to include 8 speeches in the book. The first 5 describe my journey as a teenager growing up in a war-torn country, immigrating with my family to the US, becoming a mom to 2 boys, then unfortunately raising them as a single mom, assuming their father's role or trying to in certain instances like Boy Scout projects and such. And the other 3 speeches are tributes to my role models, my father, my grandmother, my mother. So why did I decide to publish my stories? I made the decision based on 2 reasons. One, it was important for me that my future grandchildren and their descendants know their family's history, what led us to leave everything and start over in the US. I also felt it was important for them to know the sacrifices that my parents took for them to have a life in the US. The second reason is a bit more selfish. It was for me. to remind me of the milestones that shaped me, shaped who I am. There were sad experiences and happy experiences that converged into creating the person that I am today. So thinking back on my life gives me the strength to face new difficult situations. So when things are falling apart, I remember what I have done, and that gives me the strength to push forward. So what is so interesting about me that others might want to read my story? I think it begins with a motto that I adopted shortly after moving to the US. I found a poster. I don't remember where I was, but I saw this poster and it said, "Go as far as you can see. And when you get there, you'll be able to see further." So I hung that in my room and it stayed there until I moved out. And I think it's still with me here. It's not hanging, but this motto helped me a lot throughout my life. We often hear that people are shaped by their experiences. I believe that people are shaped by their responses to what they experience. And I'd like to think that every challenge presents an opportunity, but all the opportunities in the world are useless if we don't seize them and give them our best shot. Reading my book will trigger a smile, as well as a tear or two. I hope, though, that my stories will inspire readers to feel a little more confident in their ability to face the challenges of life and seize the opportunities that life might offer them. So at this point, I would like to introduce you to myself differently than the way Anderson did. And the best way for me to do that is to read the first chapter in the book. The first chapter was my very first speech, and Toastmasters asks that the first speech you do an introduction to yourself. This was written in April 2004, and it's titled, "Can You Guess Where I Was Born?" Did I mention where I was born? I was supposed to leave it as a suspense. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to introduce you to myself. I was born in a small country on the eastern shores of the Mediterranean Sea. Unlike its neighbors, it has no desert, no oil. Unlike its neighbors, it has two chains of mountains separated by a fertile valley, the Feghali Valley. It has the highest peaks in the area with crowded ski slopes and numerous beach resorts. It houses over 500 prehistoric temples dating back to thousands of years before Christ. Its name was first mentioned in tablets from 2900 BC, as well as in notable literature, including the Bible. It is the country where Jesus performed his first miracle. Can you guess where I was born? Growing up, I was never able to visit the town where Jesus transformed water into wine. In fact, I only visited 2 of the 500 temples scattered throughout the land. See, I'm a Christian, and that area was Muslim territory, which was forbidden to us. I learned a lot of lessons in my teenage years. I learned about fighting, kidnapping, hate, revenge, death, rations of food, and electricity. I remember sleepless nights spent on the ground floor along with other neighbors. We lived on the top of the building, and a 155 millimeter bomb could go through 1 or even 2 floors. Everybody systematically migrated downstairs. We played backgammon and cards, guessing whether the explosion we just heard originated from a cannon that was firing away from a nearby station, or if it was one heading in our direction. I remember waking up every morning and wondering if we had school that day. No, I wasn't considering the possibility of a snow day or a hurricane threat. It was just an ordinary morning in my country in the late 70s and early 80s. I remember studying for hours till the light of a candle for an exam that would not take place, as school would close because of nearby bombings or damages from the previous night. I remember April 2nd, 1980, We were taking a math test when the blasting started at a rate never witnessed before. As the explosions grew close, the students raised their heads and stared at the teacher. I remember his words, "Ladies, you have 20 minutes left if we stay alive." As I stand before you today, many years have gone by. I am now the mother of 2 boys. When my children ask about my country, I try to share the good memories. I tell them about playing in the forest with my cousins, climbing to the top of the olive trees, pretending that they were airplanes transporting us to faraway places. I tell them about eating grapes straight from the vine and fresh figs from the tree. I tell them about collecting wildflowers in the spring. I tell them about dyeing Easter eggs with onion peels, dried herbs, and florets, and about the egg-breaking contest at the dawn of Easter. I tell them about picking oregano in the woods, letting it dry through the summer, then mixing it with olive oil, salt, and sumac to prepare the best tasting breakfast. I tell them about Sunday afternoon drives to the airport, where my dad would treat us to ice cream. It was delicious, that cold sweetness melting on my tongue. I tell them about yearly pilgrimage to the mimosa trees on Mother's Day, where we arranged the largest flowers into a beautiful bouquet for my mom. I tell them about fall mornings when it was crisp from the night's rain. We bundled up and headed to the woods to collect escargot as they came out of hibernation, and competed to find the biggest one. To this day, my cousin Joanna still claims she regularly won, but we all know that's far from the truth. I tell them about building a snowman and sliding down the mountain on a winter day, then heading down to the coast for a swim. I tell them about the most majestic experience in the world. Imagine floating in the warm Mediterranean waters under a sunny blue sky, glorious mountains facing you, on top of which stands the statue of Mary, the mother of Jesus, presiding over a shrine built for her by the faithful. She smiles and extends her arms toward the Bay of Junye to welcome you. When Daniel and Michael think about where their mother grew up, I hope they hold on to these positive images and feelings. Ladies and gentlemen, I hope that you too will conjure up these pretty pictures the next time you hear or read about my country. I was born in Lebanon. I have a little picture here of my boys and me that was taken in 2009 in front of a temple, the Baal temple in Baalbek in Lebanon. So that was my intro. I hope this speech helps you to know me a little better. I think it reveals quite a bit about my personality. Like everybody else, I do see the bad in this world. I don't forget my childhood spent in the war. I certainly did not like it, but I could not change these circumstances. So I learned to accept them. I learned to accept life as it was, as it is. So basically, that tomorrow is not guaranteed. So my job is to make today the best that I can. There's an American saying that goes with the same idea, right? When life hands you lemon, you make lemonades. Needless to say, I drank quite a bit of lemonade. And as you have heard, despite the war, I managed to make many, many happy memories in my childhood. And that's what I like to focus on. Now, I was going to read the second story. The second story is titled, "We Are Moving Where?" And I wrote it July 30th, 2004. It has a bit of statistics, so keep in mind it was written in 2004, so the stats are not current. Colombia, South Carolina, my father declared. Where? Never heard of it. Doesn't matter anyway. I'm not going. We all go or nobody goes, my father replied in a sad but firm tone. The year was 1983 in Psus, a small mountain town 15 minutes east of Beirut. It was a hot, dry day, as Mediterranean summers tend to be. My dad was visiting. During these happy moments, we went on numerous family trips. My father had been working on industrial construction projects in the Arab countries and Africa since 1975. He would live abroad for 4 months, then spend 3 to 4 weeks back home with us. This was a typical way of life for many Lebanese fathers, for the war had deteriorated the nation's economy. This visit, however, was different. My father disclosed that he was suffering from a chronic disease. His kidneys were at 10% capacity and would stop functioning in the near future. Doctors had strictly forbidden him to work in remote areas, which meant my family would no longer have a source of income. Major crisis. At 18, I was the oldest. Then came my 3 brothers who were 17, 13, and 10. My mother was a homemaker. None of us had ever worked for money, and it was impossible to find a job in a war-torn country. This was the first time I had seen my mother, the strongest person I knew, cry. She always had held her chin up high and took care of us single-handedly while Dad worked abroad. During the war, she shuttled the 4 of us from town to town, away from bullets and missiles. My mother did everything to protect us, even when she had kidney stones. With an IV bag in one hand and my youngest brother in the other, she would sleep with us in the hallway, where the attic provided an additional shield from dropping bombs. This time she did not have to dodge gunfires and explosions. It was a much stronger force, one we call our destiny. My maternal uncle suggested we move to the United States. My mother could find a job there, he said. My brothers and I would go to college and work at the same time. Dad would receive treatment. There was no other option. If you stay, he told my parents, the children will have no future. Life was not fair. I had just turned 18 and passed the official exams of Mac Elementary with flying color. I had taken the entrance examination to the Lebanese University College of Engineering, where they accepted the top 200 of 2,000 applicants. I had cut out the article from the newspaper where Sylvie Feghali was typed. My future was just starting. I had big dreams. I hated destiny. I thought God created us free to make our own destiny. Catholicism is so confusing. How could you be free and destined at the same time? I was not going to the United States. My future was here. They could go if they wanted. We all go or nobody goes. My dad's words resonated in my mind. What choice did I have after all? What would I do if I stayed behind? I couldn't even drive. Being alone at 18 in a war-torn country when you have no money, you cannot drive. The circumstances were not ideal. It was only a matter of weeks before we piled 6 people, 12 suitcases in my cousin's car and headed towards that destiny of ours. Since the airport was shut down, we had to board a ship to Larnaca, Cyprus. From there, we would fly to the United States. As the ship pulled away from shore and floated further into the Mediterranean, the sound of explosions faded away. The sight of my country became smaller as my tears grew bigger. You will never come back, my physics teacher had told me. I promised myself I would find him. After a 40-hour adventure across the Atlantic Ocean, worthy of its own narrative, we landed at LaGuardia Airport in New York City. At customs, a blonde man with blue eyes stood tall. It was 3 a.m. He did not seem very excited to see 6 people and 12 suitcases at that hour, especially when he realized he had to take our photographs for the green card application. It was Saturday, September 16, 1983. He asked if we were carrying alcohol. All my children, my mother answered in her best English. He stared at her, at our tattered suitcases, then back at our tired but proud and honest faces. The officer shook his head and said, "Welcome to the United States." We completed the formalities and were transported to a hotel for the night before taking a plane to our final destination. The hotel looked like it had jumped out of a movie screen. So high, so clean. Best of all, no bullet holes and no tape on the windows. In the room, I turned on the TV and was taken aback. It was all in English, no subtitles. I flipped through a few channels before it hit me. I would have to learn English. The following day, we landed in Colombia, South Carolina. And after spending the first month crying and refusing to leave the house, I eventually wandered outside to explore my new world. Colombia, South Carolina. Population, 124,732. 53% female, 47% male. Median age, 35.5. Major attractions, the Koger Center of the Art, Riverbank Zoo, the State Museum. Major educational center, the University of South Carolina. That's what research told me. The data I have gathered in person throughout the years is more compelling. Colombia is the hospitable city that welcomed my family over 20 years ago. It is where my mother went to work and my dad stayed at home and learned how to cook. It is where my mother learned enough English to realize that all my children would have been the right answer if the customs officer had asked why we were immigrating to the United States. We all come or nobody does, my father had said. It was for our future that my parents decided to emigrate. Colombia is where my father struggled for his life, where he died in December 2003, and where he's buried. It is where my parents, who never completed high school, proudly celebrated the college graduation of their 4 children from the University of South Carolina. It is where my father taught me how to drive, where he bought my first car. It is where I got my first job as an engineer at NCR. It is where I fell in love, married, and later divorced. It is where I had my first child, as well as my second, where I learned that soccer is not football, and that Southern is the official language in South Carolina, not English. It is where I became infatuated with sweet iced tea and fried okra. Through the ups and downs, this city is where I spent most of my life. Although I may never be a Southern belle, or crave a barbecue sandwich, or be able to say y'all with the right accent, Columbia, South Carolina is the place I call home. I have a photo of my family from back then. So we lived in a war zone. Dad working abroad, and as if that was not bad enough, he fell ill and could no longer provide. So my parents were in crisis, but out of the crisis came the opportunity to immigrate. And my parents embraced it. It took me a little while longer to do the same. After arriving in Colombia, I pretty much dove into the why me stage. But eventually, I started exploring the new opportunities now available to me. Learn English, go to college. Even though the story exposes a lot of difficulties, there's definitely silver lining. We have a proverb in Lebanon: do not hate anything, it may have happened for the best. And this proverb has proven true in my life over and over again. If you think about it, Dad's unfortunate sickness opened the door to our future success. My life, I suppose, like many of you, has been a series of trials, but I learned from them. I still go through the why me, but before long, I focus on finding the opportunity. My book, my stories are real life examples that we possess the inner strength to rise up, dust ourselves off, and find a new beginning. Just one more time. I'm going to conclude this presentation by reading an excerpt from the book's foreword that actually my older son wrote, because I think it summarizes or pretty much does a great wrap up for everything I said. Her story, he says, through trial, tribulations, and sometimes intense personal emotion, is a sincere illustration of resiliency and passion from the perspective of an immigrant single mother. Sylvie's determined spirit and the inspiration she draws from her family's sacrifices and faith consistently ring throughout the speeches. These motifs offer four crucial themes. Hidden behind darkness, there remains a light. In every hardship, there's perseverance. A heart that loves will be remembered. When you fall, you bounce back. Each story in this collection explores a smaller piece of the greater whole that is Sylvie's life. In a few anecdotes, the author presents a series of significant personal moments through humor and self-reflection. Though first composed as speeches, the messages retain the same sincerity as the day they were delivered. Whether through her struggles, revelations, or simple wit, Sylvie manages to express her entire world. You are invited to take a glimpse into the window of her life. This concludes my presentation part. So I hope you have a lot of questions because we have a lot of time left.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Yes, as a reminder, we do have a chat box at the bottom of your screen so that you can type in questions that you have for Sylvie. And of course, I have a few questions of my own. So the first one that I'd like to ask is, in reflecting on your life, was there anything that surprised you while you were writing or editing, looking back at this collection?
Yes, definitely. I saw a process, a theme in every trial, you know. First, there's a why me, of course, I'm human. But then I don't linger there too long. You know, soon I go, what can I do? You know, where's the opportunity here? And then I actually act on it. And in the end, I celebrate, you know. However, sometimes there's nothing you can do. You must learn to accept and embrace, like my immigration here, like living in a war zone. Well, what am I gonna do? Nothing. I have to accept it and I have to learn from it. And I did. And actually these lessons stay with me. Like I said, I never take tomorrow for granted. When I have to do something, I always do it right then, because I don't know that I'm going to be here tomorrow. I mean, that's just how I'm conditioned. So yeah, that theme, the the repeated theme, I didn't know about it. It wasn't until I wrote, and then after I put them all in the book, in fact, it was my son, he said, I don't think you should name it A Glimpse into My Life. And I said, what should I name it? And he said, well, what is the theme of your life? I said, I don't know. Is there a theme to my life? And he said, yes, it's about getting back up every time, and if you read the book, you'll see there were more trials, right? But we immigrated. I had to learn English. I went to College of Engineering. There were only a handful of women there when I did that. I got divorced. That was really bad. My father died. That was really bad. I lost my job. Back then, the technology jobs in Colombia weren't abundant. It took me 4 months to find out. But every time I did my best, even like my other son said, you even tried to be our dad. One of the speeches speaks about the Boy Scouts and building a derby car, and I pretty much sucked at it, but I gave him my all. So yeah, and I think anybody who reflects over their life, I don't know if everybody will see a theme, but definitely in my case, it was like that, up and down, up and down.
Yeah, I think it's fair to say that resiliency is an important part of human survival and certainly of your story. And
definitely. I didn't set out to be resilient, mind you, when you have to do what you have to do. So
I'm curious. I don't know that I realized that you knew quite so many languages. I'm very curious to know what it was like to write a book in a language that's not even your first or second language.
Okay, so let me tell you about that. In Lebanon, we're bilingual. So we grow up learning 2 languages. In school, we learn Arabic is the official language in the country, but we learn Arabic literature. We take geography and history and Arabic literature in Arabic, but math and science and French literature are in English. I mean, in either French or English, depending on the school you go to. So mine was French. So I grew up knowing French and Arabic, and we're truly called bilingual. Later, the last 3 years of school, we take a little bit of English, but we study some grammar, but we don't speak it. But what was interesting is when I moved here, my brain is French and Arabic, right? And when the first few weeks, or when I first went to college, my English was not good. And I knew some of the material because our educational system back home is more advanced. And so I would be in math class and I'm trying to understand the English, not the theory, because I knew the theory. And I watched their mouth talk, and Southern made it a bit difficult. What did he say? But I was translating when I was talking, I was translating from Arabic or French to English. I mean, I'm doing that all the time, right? I'm thinking in Arabic or French, but I have to speak in English. And you know what? I don't know when I started to think in English, but now I think in English. And my last trip back home, I was translating to Arabic or French, and even French now has taken the third row because I no longer think in it. I can still read it, understand it. But I think by 2000, when I wrote these, I was thinking in English. It's kind of interesting to consider, but yeah. Now I think in English. Look at me. I'm just talking. I'm not translating. But when I did go to France back in 1990, and I found myself translating. I mean, I was sitting there. It took me a while. People probably thought I wasn't very smart, but I was translating. So it's an interesting phenomenon if you think about it.
Yeah, we have a question from Ariel, who is curious. She would like for you to describe your process learning English.
So as I said, the last 3 years of school, we do learn English, but it was over 20. To give you a perspective, I was in math elementary, so math was over 80. Science was over 80. Arabic literature was over 40, and English was over 20. So English didn't really matter. In fact, the teacher, when he would ask us to recite like the irregular verbs, he used to call, I remember he called on one of my friends and said, come here and recite what you didn't study, because nobody studied it, you know. But I did learn, I study everything. I'm not the type that lets things go. So I did study the irregular verbs, and English is actually much easier than French, right? They both have the same root. It's sort of, I think, but it's very similar. But French and Arabic are a lot harder because things have a gender. You know, this phone, I don't know what the phone is. Let me think. It's probably a male, but you know, everything, the tree is female. You have to know that. In English, you don't. You just use it and you're good, you know? So aside from learning the irregular verbs, for example, the conjugation was really easy. It's not difficult if you are coming from a French, you know, background, because French and Arabic have so many rules. So English was not really difficult. In school, in college here, of course, you have to take English, even if you're in engineering. But I took the English for foreigners. So my English really was not advanced. I always think that my son should be the author in the family, not me, because he's really good. But hey, I made it.
Ariel has another question. Did you ever go to Cana, where Jesus performed his first miracle?
Actually, I did, but not then. One of our trips to Lebanon, I think it was in 2008, I did, my older son wanted to go to Tyre, which is a town in South Lebanon. I think it's a international heritage site, and he wanted to visit it. So I hired a cab to drive us the entire day, and we went to Tyre, and we went to Cana, and we saw. Now, I'm not really sure if the artifacts that were there were really there, had been there since Christ. There was a little boy who started telling us. There was no guide, and another person that sold me a pamphlet that said a bunch of stuff, and they showed me some jars and stuff. But so I'm not really sure that was really the site, but we did go to Cana, so I can say that.
During your talk, one of the things that you mentioned was that part of the reason that you wanted to write your story is so your descendants knew their ancestry. I'm curious, did you have access to any of your ancestors' stories?
Some that my grandmother had told me. They're not in the book. What I was meaning is from my parents down, because, you know, that was a big decision. My parents didn't speak English. I mean, my dad never really did. He spoke with his hands. And I don't know, somehow people understood what he was saying. But that was a major decision. They were the heroes of the second story that I read, right? To have the courage. I mean, they weren't rich either. They had a little bit of savings, and they took 4 children across the Atlantic and started over from nothing. It's a major sacrifice. My dad had a ton of friends back home. He had none here, right? He met a couple of people, but his life here was sheltered. He basically spent it in the backyard planting, and then just chauffeuring us around and doing what we needed. So he kind of gave up on the life that he knew, that he was comfortable with, and his friends, and the social structure too. You know, that's important, because we as children, and I wasn't a child, I was 18, but still it's easier for me to integrate, right? I have a lot of friends now, I do things, but it's not for him. So First, it was a major sacrifice for him to go work abroad and leave us, 9 months out of the year. But then the move here. So I wanted to make sure that all these stories, and there is another chapter about my dad, and I go into a lot more detail. Of course, my children know that, but I don't know that their children will. Now they will. They don't have an excuse, right? It's sort of like documenting the legacy of the family, not just what I did, but also what my parents did and what my grandmother did. My children didn't really know my grandmother. There's a chapter on her, and she was a marvelous lady. They're all heroes. They really are. And I feel like they deserve, their place in history. So I kind of carved my own little place in history for them through this book.
And I'm sure that your future generations will appreciate that.
I hope.
Mary has a question. Do you get homesick for Lebanon, or is it more nostalgic since you perhaps consider Colombia home?
Lots of nostalgia. I did get homesick in the beginning, for sure. But in fact, I remember my first trip back. So we moved here, right? But every time I traveled somewhere by virtue of my job, I traveled and then I came back to Colombia. It didn't really feel for several years. It didn't feel like I was coming home. I felt like a visitor here, right? People treated me different, like, where are you from? Do you have 4th of July over there? Questions like that. And people know I wasn't born here from my accent, right? And when we went to visit Lebanon the first time, when the plane touched the soil, I cried. I'm home. But after the second trip, it's really strange, kind of like thinking an English thing. I felt like a visitor in my country. I just didn't know how things, when I left, it was a war zone, right? So we couldn't go certain places. But when we went back for the visit, the war, well, I guess you can argue it never really stopped in a way, but it was over. And so we went to the beach, for example. My youngest child was really an infant, so he stayed back with my cousins and my aunt, and the older one went with me and my cousins that took us there. Well, that beach was on the other side, if you will, on the side that I wouldn't have been able to visit when. And I was so worried that entire day that something is going to happen and I'm not going to be able to get back to my youngest child. But they kept saying, no, it's fine now. Things are fine. But it wasn't so for me. I just couldn't imagine that. I don't know. It was difficult. So nostalgic, yes. Anytime I see a photo, anytime I hear a song, anytime I think of, if I open my photo albums, I miss some of my cousins that still live there. I miss the beauty of the country. I miss even the places that I have not seen. I'm always nostalgic, and I think I'll always be. But in terms of now, this is home.
Robin asks, how did your parents select to come to Colombia of all the places they could have gone?
Yes, that's a great question. I had an aunt who lived here. So the reason we were able to come to the US is because my grandparents had immigrated several years back and were American citizens, and they were able to sponsor us. So people cannot just decide to immigrate to the US and be welcome, But we were lucky in that my grandparents were able to request that their daughter and their daughter's family, and sponsor us to come. Well, at the time, we were supposed to go to Cleveland, Ohio, because that's where my grandparents had settled. But by the time we got our tickets and everything, my grandparents had decided they were going to move back to Lebanon. And that left my aunt. My aunt lived here with her family. And so we couldn't go to Ohio because there was nobody there. We needed to kind of have somebody who spoke English to, register us in school, or, you know, just pick us up at the airport or something. So my aunt lived here, and we moved here because she was here, and they picked us up at the airport, and we spent about the first month at their home, and eventually moved out, and they left soon thereafter, and they moved to California. But we stayed because we were already somewhat established between school and college and work. So yeah, that's why Colombia.
This is sort of.
Oops, I'm not hearing you.
I was muted. It's fine. Technology. So this is a bit of an off-the-wall question, but I want to know, who are your inspirations, whether they are literary, culinary, who inspires you?
My parents. My mom, definitely, in terms of decision making and even culinary. She's a great cook. There's a chapter on her that you can read. My dad, for his dedication and the sacrifices that he made for his family, definitely shaped how I dealt with my family. And then again, my grandparents. See, family is very important in our culture back home. It's important here, but here I feel like not as much for some reason. I just feel like over there was always, you saw your, maybe it's the geographic, you know, living in the country is so big here that some people, you hardly see your family maybe once a year or whatever, due to the geographical distance. It makes it logistically difficult. Well, back home, it's a smaller place. And so we visited family all the time. Every Easter, every Christmas, everybody comes over to visit, and you go over and visit them, all the cousins. I have over 60 cousins, first cousins, about 40 plus on my dad's side, 20 plus on my mom's side. And I know who they are. I know their husbands and their, you know, I don't know their children now because they're in Lebanon and we left. So that's kind of unfortunate. But family is, like, I didn't hear a lot of people going to a psychologist, for example, because it's the nucleus that your family kind of gets together, and then you have a cup of coffee and you resolve issues, you discuss them. So definitely my inspiration is my mom, my dad, my grandparents. That's who I look up to.
We have another question in the chat from someone who I think must know you. They would like to ask, can you talk about your experience getting your US citizenship and what it was like returning to work and the encounters that you experienced with your coworkers?
That must be somebody from my first job, because I recently posted that story. They started a group for the people that used to work at NCR. And I posted that story. Yes, so as you know, I don't know if you know, but it takes 5 years to, you have to immigrate, and you wait 5 years to get your citizenship. And I and my parents went to this little school. I think it was on Elmwood. I think the building is still there, but they offered classes. You could go to class and learn about the history of the United States, and it prepares you for the exam, because you have to take an exam. Well, it's oral, and to pass. So I had done the exam, and it was time for the ceremony, and it was downtown at the courthouse. So I had to take off work that morning to go there. And afterwards, I came to work, and it was April 20th. I remember that. I walked in, and I saw all around the walls of at work, they had these flags and different insignia, you know, for patriotic things. And I'm thinking, what? Today is April. There's nothing. I had just studied the history. I mean, I knew it wasn't a significant day. So I wondered what it was about. And as I walked, I got into the big room where my cube was, and I saw red, blue, and white ribbons from the ceiling all the way coming down over my cube, and balloons. And I walked in and they had an apple pie, and I could barely walk in from all the balloons. And then everybody showed up and they started congratulating me. And they had this big poster board across from my cube, and they all signed. And it was just simply incredible. And my team was just incredible. They insisted that I'm not a true American until I went to Sandy's and had hot dogs for lunch. So not only I had the apple pie, but I also had to go and eat hot dogs, and I had never ordered a hot dog. And I'm like, okay, what, how do you order this? What? But it was great. And it's a memory that stands out in my mind about my time at NCR. It was a great time. Thank you for asking.
So we have one last question from Haddad, who's asking if you're cooking this Sunday.
That must be my son. And the answer is, I was going to, but yes, I am.
So our last question that we have time for is, are you working on any other projects right now? And Robin specifically would like to know if you are going to be writing another book anytime soon.
I'm not ruling it out, but I am not actively working on a book. I do have my blog, sylviesadventures.com. You're welcome to visit. And this year I started learning photography. So I have a lot of photography project, if you will. I like hiking, and I do a bit of write-up. I try to research the places where we go, but not right now. I'm not ruling it out. I feel like I need to learn a lot more, though, to write a novel in order to measure up. But we'll see. You never know.
Wonderful. So I think that is all the time that we have for this evening. To learn more about Sylvie and to purchase a copy of her book, A Glimpse into My Life, I encourage you to visit her blog, which is linked in the chat. You can also find a great recipe for vegan Lebanese grape leaves, which I am excited to try out for myself.
Yeah.
To learn more about upcoming author talks hosted by Read SC, please visit readsc.org. Thank you all again for joining us. Stay safe and be well.
Thank you. Bye-bye.